Welcome to Beekeeping Today podcast, your source for beekeeping news, information, and entertainment, presented by Better Bee. I'm Jeff Ott.
I'm Becky Masterman.
And I'm Kim Flottam.
Hey, Jeff and Kim. Today's sponsor is Global Patties. They're a family-operated business that manufactures protein supplement patties for honeybees. It's a good time to think about honeybee nutrition. Feeding your hives protein supplement patties will ensure that they produce strong and healthy colonies by increasing brood production and overall honey flow. Now is a great time to consider what type of patty is right for your area and your honeybees. Global offers a variety of standard patties as well as custom patties to meet your needs. No matter where you are, Global is ready to serve you out of their manufacturing plants in Airdrie, Alberta, and in Butte, Montana, or from distribution depots across the continent. Visit them today at www.globalpatties.com.
Thank you, Sherry, and a quick shout out to all of our sponsors whose support allows us to bring you this podcast each week without resorting to a fee-based subscription. We don't want that, and we know you don't either. Be sure to check out all of our content on our website. There you can read up on all our guests, read our blog on the various aspects and observations about beekeeping, search for, download, and listen to over 200 past episodes, read episode transcripts, leave comments and feedback on each show, and check on podcast specials from our sponsors. You can find it all at www.beekeepingtodaypodcast.com. Becky, one of the things popping up again is the whole native versus non-native discussion. We will have more on that in the next couple episodes with some other guests. But, that is such an interesting debate. I was at a beekeepers meeting this last weekend and it came up as well.
Jeff, was that Washington State Beekeepers Association meeting?
Yes, Becky, I'm glad you asked. Washington State Beekeepers Association meeting. I was there and presented along with many other great people.
That was a star-studded lineup of bee presentations. That was an impressive lineup, including yourself. I was a little jealous that I wasn't at that meeting.
It was a good group of people, and it was fortunately right here in Olympia, and I was able to meet many great listeners, and the panelists were all good too. But the whole native versus non-native, if you were to give one word of advice as a tease for future episodes, but for beekeepers who are going around and talking to friends and they say, well, aren't honeybees harmful to native pollinators? I mean, that's the key phrase. What would be your response? What can a beekeeper who loves both honeybees and bumblebees and native bees, what could be a possible reply?
Jeff, that is an excellent question. And I talk to beekeepers about this all the time because I think that it is our responsibility to understand the competition issue. But more importantly, we need to understand where this competition is stemming from. And that's the current pollinator habitat crisis we have. We have seen honeybees suffer because of a change in land use, and we've seen their honey production suffer. And of course, if it's impacting our honeybees, it's going to be impacting other bees out there. But this isn't a matter of honeybees versus native bees. This is a matter of everybody who loves bees and who wants great pollination, managed and native wild pollination to occur. We all need to get on board and support more habitat for these pollinators.
There you go, folks. Just a little tease. In future episodes, we do have guests lined up to talk about this topic. But for me, I'm just coming off of this meeting with Washington State Beekeepers Association. It was a topic both in the discussions and in the hallways. And I was just chomping at the bit to ask Becky today.
What was your talk about to beekeepers?
No surprise to our listeners. My topic was using technology in the bee yard. So it's all of the gadgets and or some people would call toys. I call them, electronic devices in the bee yard to help monitor what's happening in the beehive at any given moment.
Oh, I bet you had an enthusiastic audience.
They were all, I would suspect, lovers of technology and what you can do, including, the temperature sensors and humidity sensors and scales as the baseline. But then we also talked about drones, and not only the male bees, but also the quadcopters, and using those in a bee yard or using those to find drone congregation areas, as we had a guest many episodes ago, Julia Mahood, Find My DCA, Find My Drone Congregation Area.
I love that.
It was fun. I let my geek flag fly. I can't say that fast.
Hey, can we use drones to find out what our habitat looks like a couple of miles around our bee yards? Go to different places and map it out?
Absolutely, you can. Of course, there's a drone that can do everything. The challenge with any of this is that technically, per the FAA, you have to keep your drone within visual line of sight. So you can do that in multiple ways. But yes, it's a good idea. I think several years ago, Kim and I suggested that beekeepers look at Google Maps and to get an idea of a 2-mile radius around their hives to see what's around. And of course, there's the old drive, or my preference, ride a bike. So.
Oh, there you go. There you go. The problem with Google Maps sometimes is that it catches it when nothing is blooming. And so you have to go when the flowers are blooming sometimes to get a good idea. That's really interesting that you're able to share all those tech info gadgets with beekeepers.
Yeah, it is fun.
Jeff, Meghan was at that meeting with you, correct? Meghan Milbrath?
Meghan was at the conference and was able to sit and talk with her quite a bit, and looking forward to having her on the show today.
I can't wait. Looking forward to talking to her.
Meghan is assistant professor at Michigan State University in Department of Entomology. And she was on our show back in June of 2020 with Dr. Kirsten Trainer, talking about what she's doing. So we're just kind of, this is our first opportunity to talk with Meghan directly. Let's do that real quick, right after we hear from our friends at Strong Microbials.
Strong Microbials presents an exciting new product, Superfuel, the probiotic fondant that serves as nectar on demand for our honeybees. Superfuel is powered by 3 remarkable bacteria known as bacilli, supporting bees in breaking down complex substances for easy digestion and nutrient absorption. This special energy source provides all the essential amino acids, nutrients, polyphenols, and bioflavonoids, just like natural flower nectar. Vital for the bees' nutrition and overall health, Superfuel is the optimal feed for dearth periods, overwinter survival, or whenever supplemental feeding is needed. The big plus is the patties do not get hive beetle larvae, so it offers all bioavailable nutrients without any waste. Visit strongmicrobials.com now to discover more about Superfuel and get your probiotic fondant today.
And while you're at the Strong Microbial site, make sure you click on and subscribe to The Hive, the regular newsletter full of interesting beekeeping facts and product updates. Hey, everybody, welcome back. Sitting across the virtual Beekeeping Today podcast table is Dr. Meghan Milbrath, assistant professor at Michigan State University in Lansing. Meghan, it's taken a lot to get you here. Thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
So happy to see you again, Meghan.
Likewise.
Meghan, you were on the show last with Kirsten Trainer back in 2020. And so that was a one-on-one with Kirsten, and didn't get the opportunity to talk to you. I did talk to you recently at the Washington State Beekeepers meeting, and that was a good time to get caught up, and it was nice to see you there.
Yeah, that was a wonderful meeting. I learned a lot and had fun.
I'm glad you did. I have to say, though, that I wished I hadn't talked to you so much, because I guess I got distracted. And in the process of all of that, somehow I got nominated to be on the board of Washington State Beekeepers Association, and I wasn't around to decline the nomination. So if I have to blame somebody, I'll blame you. And
maybe Meghan was part of that plan. Maybe it was a bigger conspiracy than you actually think.
Yeah.
It's actually why they asked me out there.
Just talk to him about EFB.
No, I'm just kidding, of course. But it was fun to see you and talk to you and meet many of your peers and listen to you on the panel discussion, too. That was good and very informative. So we've invited you here to kind of give us an update on what you're doing recently. And there's a couple specific things that we'll get to. One being, I'd like to hear an update on what are veterinarian students learning about honeybees today. We learned early on what they might be learning, but what are they learning in 2023? And then also, European Foulbrood's a big topic of interest, and I know you're up to speed on that. For those who don't know you, why don't you give us a little bit of background about yourself, your bee operation, and then we'll get into those other topics.
As mentioned, I'm currently working as an assistant professor at Michigan State University, My appointment is basically half extension, half research, and 10% teaching. And all of that teaching is in the veterinary school with a vet student rotation. And then I also am a beekeeper on the side. So I've been keeping bees off and on since I was a kid, and then more seriously as a business since about 2011. So I'm in South Central Michigan, and I run a beekeeping and queen rearing operation down there.
Megan, you just told us that your job is 110%. Does it feel like it's 110% of your time?
I was doing the math too, but I didn't want to interrupt her.
And, and I am one of those people who is very busy, but I was recently, if I had more time, I would just get more hives or pick up another project or write another grant. So I'm
right.
Yeah. the joys of loving what you do, I guess. Yes. But yes, I'm definitely working 2 jobs, and it feels like 2 jobs.
And you have a new bee building at MSU, right?
We do have a new bee building. Yes. So I think the last time I was on here, we were in the process of acquiring it, but now we have a new facility that is mostly the way done, remodeled, in that we can keep bees out of, which is fantastic.
Makes your job a little bit easier.
It makes my job a million times easier. It was tough before.
So for someone who's never been into bee building before, what does that mean? What does that entail? Is that just like a faceplate on a building, or is it an actual Quonset hut? What is it?
I mean, ours is definitely a unique situation. So we had a facility on campus that was built for a professor that does indoor animal air quality, which sounds lovely. In reality, this might be the first thing we cut. It is where you put animals into stalls and have them poop into buckets, and then you record the chemicals in the air that come out of it. Which, if you think about it, is very important for animal production and animal welfare and things like that. But we have someone at the time took actual posters of animals pooping in buckets and blew them up to poster size. So we still have them in the building. So I can tell you exactly what it was used before. Obviously, it was cleaned. Then ahead of time, Becky mentioned twice my love of biosecurity and my dislike of fecal transmitted diseases. But a lot of the HVAC was out from the 90s. And so that building had been, part of it was used for quite a few years. Part of it was actually never used, and it's just been for storage. And then the research that was happening in that facility ended, and it was used for storage. And then we were able to work out getting it from the other department, the animal sciences, and move it into entomology and South Campus area farms. Michigan State's really lovely in that we have the central campus, and then just south, we have fully operating farms right on campus. So we're right across from the dairy, which means that we're in the land of milk and honey. And it's by far the best part on campus. And so we retrofitted, we got funding from the department and the college to kind of remodel part of it. So we made a honey house so we can actually extract our own honey. We had been taking it out to commercial places and just paying by the pound previously. We have spaces that are set up now for more equipment storage. We have a little sampling processing room where we can do all of our mite washes. I have my office there. We have some other bee people. Our extension apiculture educator is stationed out there. So it's basically our house where we run all of my bee experiments, all of our teaching. We have the vet student rotation out there. Zachary Huang, who's another bee researcher at MSU, operates out of that building. It houses our BIP tech transfer team employees. Lots of bee stuff is happening there.
That's really exciting.
It's wonderful, yes.
You mentioned the former professor did what kind of research?
Animal indoor air quality.
Indoor air?
Yeah.
Okay. I wanted to make sure because I didn't hear that quite clearly. Indoor air.
I'm pretty sure that's right. There is a sign. Yeah, so there's a sign to that effect. But yeah, it's air quality.
I just feel bad for I'm sure it was an undergrad student who had to carry the buckets from point A to point B. What a bad job. Anyways, well, that sounds like it's a much needed improvement there. And the work that you're doing, I'm sure, is well worth the effort that the university put into it. That's exciting.
Mm-hmm.
So can we go from poop buckets to European Foulbrood? Is that a good transition?
It's parallel. It's parallel.
I can tell you're a professional.
I'll just preface this. We had a great talk the other day with Jerry Hayes of Bee Culture, who was doing a little bit of a deep dive into blueberries and pollination and bees coming out with EFB potentially. And he ended up with Meghan as a resource. And we had a great, probably hour. We don't have time for it today, but we had a great hour just of EFB, blueberries, pollination. We just listened to Meghan for that time. So can you do it in less than an hour and still get all that information and share it with us? Because you're doing amazing work, Meghan. I remember when you were getting into European Foulbrood and doing a deep dive in that, but you've really made huge progress.
I am glad you think so, because I actually went through and listened to the 2020 recording, which was a lot on European Foulbrood. And, 3 years ago feels like we've gotten so far and also still know nothing about it. I think it's one of the things we talked about is just how important it is economically. It's one of the most important diseases in terms of having an effect on beekeepers and honey production and colony health. But it is so misunderstood or not heavily researched and poorly understood. And, even though I've been working on it, I guess in the 3 years since we talked, I've been working on it since about 2018. It still feels like we're just answering some of these super simple questions and so much remains unknown. One of the things I was excited about when we were at the Washington meeting was that there are a few more people joining our ranks as being EFB researchers. And that was really thrilling to find out.
We're kind of at a spot from what you said was that the EFB we used to worry about, it might be a little bit different now as far as the scale and as you mentioned, the economic impact. Can you bring people up to date about that?
Well, one of the things that I discussed in the last one, that the reason that I got into EFB research is because beekeepers just bring it up as this thing that happens in the springtime and is especially following blueberry production. And the commercial beekeepers that I work with always mention, yes, it's really bad. The first 2 years, we really just spent kind of collecting data on how bad is it? What are the prevalence rates? And turns out they were correct. It was bad. But one of the characteristics, or one of the ways that it's often characterized, I should say, is that, people call it spring brood disease and that it just goes away right away. And what we found when we followed colonies, sometimes into September, you still see signs of disease. And that isn't in line, at least with what a lot of people tell me. Like I say, I've only been studying it since 2018. And that's really when it actually kind of started to affect my own bees as well. So I don't have a lot of historical experience with it. But when you talk to other beekeepers, it used to not be taken quite as seriously. One thing, though, is we just don't have a lot of historical data. So one of the projects we're working on at the moment is actually doing whole genome sequencing and looking at which strains are circulating in the United States. There are no studies, at least as far as I know, that just say, here's what European Foulbrood is circulating in the US. So we're about to publish a manuscript that indicates some strains that are circulating, or I guess we're working on it still. It's about strains that are circulating in the United States. And then hopefully with the whole genome data that we can actually look into some of the characteristics of these strains and see how they relate to different colony health outcomes.
That would be interesting to find out. I had never even considered the different strains of European Foulbrood.
So Peter Fowler, who is a licensed veterinarian and then a PhD student that's been working with me, we both have a love for all the old literature. And so it was characterized in 1912. And obviously they're not taking photographs, but they have drawings. And we were just discussing yesterday, looking at these old drawings, some of them look a little different. Some of them look just spot on like we see, and some of them look different. And wondering if it's, there's definitely space and time between those figures and what we see now, and if there's strain variation or what was the difference between those, which is interesting. But yeah, for a disease that was characterized so early, there's surprisingly little known about it.
Dr. Jimmy Tu and I have talked on his podcast on Honeybee Obscure about old equipment, and there's always the discussion about recycling old frames, brood frames and everything. And it would be really interesting to go through some of these old-time beekeepers through their equipment from 30 years ago or something like that, get some scrapings out of those old brood comb to compare that to anything that's present today.
Yeah, so we have been doing, now you're touching on one of my favorite topics too about dormancy. So everybody's excited about bacterial dormancy. I know, but
Keeps me up at night, really.
Yeah. I was just watching a Netflix the other day about that.
Isn't Brad Pitt starring in that one?
I think so.
Oh my gosh, you guys. So the American Foulbrood does have a spore form, right? And spores are super environmentally stable. Melissococcus plutonius, the one that causes EFB, does not have a spore form. So it should not be that dormant. And so we have just kind of tested colonies that have died from it and old equipment a little bit. But what we've been doing more systematically is looking at how long it persists on different equipment. We tested a few strains. So one is like the classic registered trademark strain that researchers use. And then we tested some strains that were circulating. And we did that as a pilot project with a veterinary student, Robin Howley, last summer. And she was there for the summer. So we put the bacteria on woodenware, we put it on wax, we put it on canvas representing your bee suit, we put it on metal representing hive tools, and we looked to see if we could, we left it in the air just sitting out, and then we looked to see if we could still recover it after a couple weeks. And so she tested it 1 week and 2 weeks and 3 weeks and 4 weeks, and it could always get it back. Honey was a little more variable, which makes sense. And then we have now dragged that out to a year. And for the strains that are circulating, we can find it on all those materials. And this is a bacteria, again, that does not have a spore form. So somehow, and it's becoming dormant. The experiment that we haven't done yet is to look to see if after it sits, if it's still infectious. So we're hoping to do that, to continue that study, to look at different strains, to look at different materials, to look at different disinfectants, and then also to see if these ones, after they've been, sitting out in the environment, if they're still infectious.
Hold that thought. We're going to hear from Better Bee, and we'll be right back.
Are your bees ready to take on winter? Don't leave them vulnerable to varroa mites. Introducing Apabioxyl, the ultimate varroa treatment for your honeybees. It's the only oxalic acid on the market that's EPA approved to safely eliminate those pesky mites. Vaporize it, dribble it, do whatever it takes to ensure your varroa numbers stay low as temperatures drop. Visit betterbee.com/oxalic today to learn more and secure your Apabioxyl to send your bees into winter strong and healthy.
We just talked to Judy Woo Smart about rotating out frames, and she was focusing on pesticides and how that was important. I'm hearing that is even maybe more important if you have any kind of disease like EFB potentially in your operation. Can you tell us a little bit about what biosecurity recommendations, not just the frames, but also your hive tool that you're recommending to beekeepers?
So we do have biosecurity recommendations, but a lot of them are based on here is what we think are best practices and not necessarily based on scientific information that these have been shown to reduce actual pathogen risk. We do talk a lot about hive tools. We are releasing videos of this as part of our veterinary training series that we'll do, and that I know we'll talk about later. But we do try to keep things very much at a yard level is what we recommend. So one of the incredibly frustrating things about European Foulbrood is that the bacteria is found in many, many places, even when you don't see signs of disease, including in the adult bees. And which makes it really hard to get rid of, because if it was just on the equipment, that would be very simple. When it's in the nurse bees or in the adult bees, even in colonies that don't have signs of disease, you kind of have to picture getting rid of disease that you can't see, which is really difficult to beekeepers. It's very straightforward to say, oh, if you have a colony that has signs of disease, take it to a quarantine yard or treat it or wash your hive tool afterwards. But it's kind of this, if you have a colony that's in the area where there's European foulbrood disease, or especially in the same yard, or if you have it in your operation, that you have to be still maintaining these practices. There is kind of an assumption or an understanding that because the bees drift so much that they're, once it's in a yard, that you'll see it throughout the same yard. We did set up a study to look at the different strains that were circulating in different beekeeping operations. So we looked at the same operation over many years, and then we looked at within an operation, we looked at multiple hives in the same yard and multiple yards in the same operation. We're still looking through those data, but I can tell you that it's not straightforward. So we can definitely find multiple strains in the same operation and over time and over space. And so, as a scientist, the scientist half of my job is like, yay, that's so much job security. The extension person who wants to go out and help beekeepers is like, come on, man. So it is really complex on how it's spread and how it's shifted between the yards, and what the risk is and how much is moved by beekeepers, because we know it can both be on the equipment and then also in the adult bees.
Out here, many of the beekeepers work with bees in and out of blueberries in the springtime. We've been told that they'll take bees that are healthy into the blueberries and just count on them dealing with European foulbrood when they pull them out. Is there any idea of what specifically on the blueberry fields that is it the blueberries? Is it the ground that's causing this? Or is it the bees?
We hear the same thing, and that's definitely an issue in Michigan. That being said, we also have a lot of European foulbrood disease outside of that context. So there isn't anything completely unique to blueberry fields that results in disease. Some of our samples come from hobby operations or small-scale operations, from backyard and stationary beekeepers. We have European foulbrood on MSU campus, which I love as an educator because then I could show it to the veterinarians and show them about it. We have it in places where there really just aren't blueberries around. We do have a manuscript coming out that does show that we worked with a beekeeper and had some hives in blueberries, some hives not in blueberries, and had basically the same rate of active EFB infection. So it does have an association. One of the things that we do know is that it's highly seasonal. So even in colonies that aren't near blueberries, it tends to show up at the time of blueberry bloom, or really right at the end of blueberry bloom. So when we do our study, we would follow colonies the day they were put into blueberries, basically the day they were scheduled to leave blueberries, and then 2 weeks post-bloom. And we would see most of the infection between that leaving blueberries and that 2-week post-bloom. However, that's the same timeline as the bees that are not anywhere near blueberries. So I'm not saying that there isn't a thing, but it's definitely not the only thing that causes European foulbrood.
Is the EFB in beekeeper colonies across the United States, is it being tracked to the level that you would like it to be tracked? Just because your background is in public health, are we doing enough as an industry to watch this disease so that we know how it trends? Or are your experiments doing that for us?
No, as an epidemiologist, it's horrifying, and I wish there was about 10 billion times more data. But, and I do think it is really underappreciated for the economic cost. There was a study that came out of Alberta that they estimated that it was about $500 per hive, which is per hive that had infection if you count in honey loss. And when we go out to beekeeping operations and when we were following them all summer, it was horrifying, the loss of animal life and the loss of production that was in these colonies. And in some of these commercial operations, like that's there's a large amount of money loss. And anytime that you have an agricultural industry that is affected by a pest or pathogen that's resulting in huge economics, it should be taken more seriously. And people really don't take European foulbrood more seriously. And people are probably going to come at me for this, but I feel like it's worse than Varroa.
That was my next question, actually.
Yeah, I'll say why first, because I just don't want you to use that as a soundbite and then everybody comes at me. So with Varroa, there are tools that I really feel like I have a good understanding. I mean, it's still very frustrating to deal with. And I would not say that, even though I've been managing it the last few years very well, I would not say that I have Varroa figured out. But I feel like I have a much better understanding of here's the context in which I would use this tool. And I have more confidence in my ability to manage Varroa than I have confidence in my ability to instruct someone on how to deal with their European Foulbrood. And, that's coming from somebody who loves it, and studies it all the time. It's really frustrating when we want to talk about treatment, but then also when we want to talk about prevention. It is really hard to understand who is at risk of developing disease and what actions we can take that are actually really going to be useful for lowering the amount of disease. So I don't think that it needs to be necessarily that we need like a registration and inspections and, burning hives and things like that. I don't think that that's necessarily economically feasible in most places, but I do think that it does deserve a lot more attention and respect as a serious pathogen of honeybee colonies.
That was great. My follow-up, and sad, is do you think that people, because there's been such an awareness, a lot of my career, a lot of your career has been generating an awareness for Varroa. Do you think a lot of people are blaming like their colony problems on Varroa now, and maybe they could have EFB in their operation? Or although there are very telltale signs often with European Foulbrood, but do you think that there might just not be that capacity with some of the beekeepers out there to be able to ID the disease?
I'm not sure about them, mixing it up with Varroa, because that is in a lot of beekeeping operations, it's also underdiagnosed and underappreciated. But I do believe that there is a lot of undiagnosed and unmanaged European Foulbrood disease. So either by people that just say, oh, this is spring brood disease, and I don't really think about it. And in a lot of cases, it does self-resolve. So you can have, people who have it and they don't do anything and it goes away. And so that does make it so that people don't really realize it, that they may have it or they didn't have to do anything. So they may not take it seriously. And, when we're doing our studies, we're looking at the brood so closely. So when we're looking at how their disease, we're really doing hardy inspections, sometimes during the honey flow. So at times that people wouldn't necessarily be doing really, really heavy inspections. So maybe later they see, they see a spotty brood pattern that's kind of unexplained, and that might be all that they noticed from it. Or maybe the colony is not making as much honey as they thought, and that's all that they know.
And just real quick, what's the recommended course of treatment for European Foulbrood?
Just real quick, solve it for everyone.
Yeah, just sum it up in 25 words or less.
Yeah. So, and MSU is hosting a webinar. So Peter Fowler and I will have one that will be, by the time this comes out, it should be on our YouTube channel, where we do spend quite a bit more time on this. But the treatment recommendation really depends on your likelihood of reinfection. So there are some places that have taken it very seriously, like an eradication campaign, where they basically are treating it like the areas where they treat AFB very aggressively. So so Norway's the one that comes to mind, where they're actually burning colonies and trying to get rid of the pathogen. But in that context, you're not very likely to get reinfected. Obviously, that's not economic if you're in an area that's very, very dense with beekeepers. So if I was a small scale beekeeper and I was really remote, and let's say bears took out my colonies and I had to buy my nukes and they happened to have EFB, I might take that seriously enough that I would, get rid of some colonies and really treat it seriously so that I wouldn't have that pathogen hanging around. Because as I mentioned, when you see active disease, that means that pathogen is going to be present in lots of other colonies. And so you can't just treat the colony that you see it in. So what we see, I'm just going to go on a tangent because you guys keep nodding. So what we see at MSU and, in other operations is that, we can mark a colony, oh, this is the one with EFB. And next spring, that one looks gorgeous, stunning, not a sign of disease. And the one right next to it is coming down. And then, the next year it flip-flops. And so, you can easily have a colony that has the pathogen. And when we go out and we look and we say, are there signs of disease? And then is the pathogen present? We easily find the pathogen present. And I'm not going to say the numbers because we're still working on the data now, but it's in a high proportion. So we can find the bacteria when the colonies look gorgeous and perfect and no sign of disease. So if you really only focus on the colonies that are showing signs, like if you move those to a quarantine yard and just fix those, you're not really solving the problem for you the next spring. And so what we don't want to do is have a bunch of people doing an enormous amount of work that doesn't actually reduce their reinfection risk or the idea that it will pop up again. There are kind of some more stricter recommendations if you are really far removed. If you aren't very far removed, well, I can tell you some things that don't work too. We did try looking at just using probiotics for recovery. We've tried looking at just feeding them protein patties for recovery. And it's really hard to do these studies because, as I mentioned, a lot of times it can self-resolve as well. So there's a lot of interest in like essential oils or things like that. But you have to make sure that you have a very large number of colonies that are going into these treatment trials because there's so much variability, even when you're not providing any treatments. And so we have done some recovery trials, but there isn't anything that we have found that caused the infection to clear up faster than the antibiotics, so oxytetracycline. However, there are cases where it cleans up with no action at all. So my first recommendation is if you're very far away, you could take it very seriously. The second recommendation is that you could use watchful waiting, depending on the strength of the colony and the severity of disease. Now, if that colony was very, very tiny and high likelihood of being robbed out and the disease was very severe, that's not the recommendation. But if you noticed a couple of cells that started to look bad and the colony was overall strong and there was a good honey flow on, waiting it out is a thing, but I would be really cognizant that that's now in that yard. So you're going to have to be aware of what the risk is in that particular yard. And this is where the biosecurity measures become really important because then you can set up boundary systems. So if you're a beekeeper that has, 3 yards, you put all the blue equipment in one yard and, where the EFB is, or you mark those frames, or you have a system where you kind of have 2 separate operations and you can work on it that way. Another thing that we've tried that doesn't work is, see how more depressing I can make this conversation. So another thing that we try that doesn't work is just pulling out the brood nest. So, one of my thoughts, because also it creates such a spotty brood pattern that sometimes even if the disease goes away, that bad pattern still remains. And intuitively, it feels very different when you have a colony that is perfectly healthy and you have those nice concentric circles of brood, and a colony where there's technically not any sign of disease. Like you don't see any disease larva, but the pattern's all messed up because it's been messed up for months. And so I thought if we just take the brood nest out, it gives them a full break in the brood cycle. But just trying that on some small scale, we had disease come back within the same summer, let alone, coming back the next season. What I have been trying a little bit more this year, which I won't really know how it works till next year, is doing a full shook swarm. So that's something we've used very easily with American Foulbrood, where we take the bees and shake them onto brand new equipment. And you can do that, or you can do that in conjunction with the antibiotics. And doing that at the yard level. And again, that would be a situation when you're maybe not eradicating it from the operation. So you're moving all of the brood or all of the rest of the equipment can go into another yard that also has EFB or has issues with it, but then you hopefully clean out that yard. So a lot of what we talk about is really, because this pathogen is so widespread, we talk a lot about disease management and control. Preventing spread from yard to yard or reducing spread from yard to yard, reducing it outside of your operation. And then also, when your animals get sick, you try to clear it up as quickly as possible.
I'm glad you brought up about the veterinarians and the animals, because that's the last part of our little discussion is what are veterinarians learning today about EFB and about honeybees in general? That's a new field of study for them.
Yes, so it has been my absolute delight to start working a lot more with veterinarians, even though I wish it was under a happier context. But it has been, I mean, I do think we need more people working on these issues and bringing in a lot of people with this animal practitioner background. And I should say, like, I'm not even working only with veterinarians, but we work with vet techs, and we also are working with a lot of veterinary researchers. And they're coming in with this background that is very, very useful for, biosecurity plans, for disease management, for disease monitoring, and for also the research. So I think bringing them into the honeybee fold in the long term will be really, really positive. When I work with them, I really have two goals. I have a short-term goal and a long-term goal. And the short-term goal is that we at least get some of them that are comfortable enough prescribing antibiotics that we don't have this bacterial disease just run unchecked. So if a beekeeper does need them to manage disease and to help the health of their animals, that they are able to find someone to have access. And so I've been very lucky in getting funding to work towards that. And so I have some grants in multiple states where we're working to try to develop a cohort of veterinarians that at least are to the point where if a beekeeper calls them, they're not going to just say, no, I don't work with bees. And that's, it's slow, but we also don't need 1 million to do that. We maybe need 5 to 10 in every state. It's a geographic. So it is, I think, a very reasonable goal. And then the long-term goal is that they're actually useful to the industry. So if you think about production medicine, for example, for like dairy, a lot of larger production facilities will have a vet on staff that comes in and does their monitoring. So they could send a tech out, do your mite washes, and apply treatments or recommend treatments for you. And so they could help with other issues. We could have them focused on nutrition research. We could have, even doing more diagnostics. We teach a lot of how to do microscopic diagnostics, and a lot of veterinarians have microscopes and are comfortable looking at slides and making slide preps. And so having more people that can quickly diagnose EFB is also going to be really useful. So I think there's definitely room for them. I think it's just, you've got to play the long game on how they fit in and when it is going to be really useful.
It'd be a whole new chapter in the All Creatures Great and Small,
Mm-hmm.
Have James Harriet look at honeybees. Anyway, I think that's really good to have more resources helping beekeepers. I grew up keeping bees in Ohio, and we had county bee inspectors, but that program's gone away for the most part. But it was always nice to have that resource available you could call on. Now, if veterinarians could fulfill part of that in terms of diagnosis and take back a sample and put it under a microscope and confirm it for you, that would save Beltsville some headache and shipping samples across the state and everything else. That would be really nice to have. I can see that.
Great resource, I think. And I was able to meet some of the University of Minnesota people interested in, I think, some of the training that you provided funding for. And I was just helping out that day, and they all approached me and said, is there a way we can volunteer? Can we volunteer? How can we get more experience? And I think it's a great idea for vet students to set up a bee club. I think you've done a bee club on the MSU campus, but it makes sense to have a vet student bee club so that during each year of their educational training, they have that access to go out to hives and just do hands-on work. I think that could be a really strong option here in Minnesota.
Yes, and I will happily work with anybody that's associated with any vet school in the U.S. They can reach out to me because we are trying to get it more. So we have at MSU, we have the bee club, but then we also try to kind of throw it into every class. So if there's a One Health class that they learn about bees, if there's an ethics class, they learn about bees. And then we actually just finished our 6th year of our 3-week rotation. So we have 4-year veterinary students go through a rotation, and they leave that rotation. I mean, it's amazing to see how fast they go from not even knowing what a honeybee looks like to being able really to diagnose disease. They can do a hive inspection. Because it's The one that we do is 5 days a week, 8 hours a day for 3 weeks. They're really deep into it. But
Boot camp.
Yeah. And we do just try to get it part of the curriculum so that if they do get a call from a beekeeper, they don't have to be like, wait, bees are animals? Wait, we're covered
this is livestock? What? Yeah.
Yep. We're like, your license actually covers you to work with honeybees. And so they shouldn't be surprised. So we do try to bring it into part of the curriculum. So yes, Minnesota is one of the partners on one of the grants that I'm working on. And with that one, we have an online course that we're developing. We have a survey that we try to connect with as many veterinarians and vet techs as possible in the US. And then we organize hands-on clinics so that they can get hive time, and organizing Zoom calls for them so that they can stay in contact and we can answer questions. And the idea is that's the one where we're trying to at least get a cohort of vets that have had in-hive experience. They have a relationship with us. So one of their major concerns is their license is at stake. They have to make sure that when they're prescribing an antibiotic, or if they're giving you a recommendation, that they will be covered. And so they can't just go out willy-nilly and say like, oh, here, I'll just write you a script. They do have to do things to make sure that their veterinary client-patient relationship is legit, that they've covered, they're giving a recommendation or writing an order in a case where it is actually appropriate. And a big part of that is they don't know, how many hives do you have to look at to set up a VCPR? Or how, do you have to wait until you have a formal diagnosis? Or is it appropriate to use antibiotics in metaphylactic use? And so what we're trying to do is have that relationship with them and then be a resource so that they know who to ask, so that they can have their paperwork, so that they have their butts covered. So I've actually had multiple veterinarians call me from the field and ask questions, and I'm happy to do that because it allows them to provide the practice, or to, complete that practice. And then knowing that they've reached out to an expert, or they are doing industry standards or things like that, allows them to continue to practice.
That's a great resource. We're going to put your number in the show notes. Nope, I'm kidding.
It's everything's out there anyway. I know how to put it on you. But I mean, I do the appeal for anybody who, like any extension professional or someone associated with the vet school that's interested in setting up programs. Absolutely, you can call me, because I would love to help more people set it up in their own states. And we've had a really positive response, and it's been very fun.
You're going to be working 120%.
Yeah.
Meghan, I need to sneak in a really quick question. I just think the beekeepers are going to want to know, really specifically, big and small beekeepers, multiple hive tools. I'm assuming that you're disinfecting with bleach. And then also, are you recommending putting on latex or nitrile gloves when you're going in and out of the colonies?
Oh, yeah. So the system that we use is we have a box of clean hive tools, and then when they're used, we try to keep it at the yard level. So once they're through a yard, they go to the dirty pile. And so and the dirty pile is just basically a dish bin. And then what we do is we just soak them in bleach water for a while. And we do this in the field too. So we just bring a jug of water, a little bit of bleach, and then we use like Comet scrubbing powder, or any powder. They don't sponsor me. And then try to get all the material. I know I've reached out and asked both Clorox and Comet to sponsor me, and I haven't got any responses, oddly. But what we've really focused on is getting everything off the tool. So all of the propolis and wax. So we, you use two tools together to kind of scrape them. I'm doing the hand motion for the listeners. And so you use the tools to scrape them against each other to clean everything off, and then use the scrubby pad. And that seems to work well for us. We also, for research, do autoclave them. And I have a joke that I have an autoclave room in our building, and it's an Instapot on a rolling cart. But you can actually sterilize things in an Instapot, and the hive tools fit.
Oh, that's
and
great.
That's probably overkill for most beekeepers, but it's available. I mean, there are people for allergic reactions have to wear leather gloves or things like that. And again, my recommendation would be to keep those at the yard level. And so, because they're expensive, but they're not that expensive. And, the hive tools on the hands are the things that go in the hive the most. And so we do recommend nitrile gloves or washing your hands, and just going barehanded.
And do you get to the extent of wearing booties?
So I did listen on the last one. I talked about, I got invited to work in Hawaii at different farms, and they take biosecurity there very seriously. And we did wear booties. And I have had conversations, actually like a snake veterinarian, where they have to deal with a lot of fungal issues. And for wildlife vets, they deal with fungal diseases a lot. And so they do booties. But one of the conversations I've had recently is trying to figure out what the role is of soil. So there is someone at Washington State that is starting to look into that. And, it's harder to think about how bees would be getting, what that exposure route would be. However, again, we just need so much more EFB research or so much more disease research that it's nice to know where these pathogens are, when we're talking about the diseases and where they are and where they could potentially go.
Well, the bees get water from so many diverse and what we would think terribly dirty places. You think, well, that manure runoff trickle of water is, wow. Back to our poop collection talk from the very first part of the
for bringing
episode.
It back to poop for me.
Yeah, it always comes back to poop.
Well, and one of the things too is when they bring up those bacteria back in the hive, bacteria love to share mobile elements. So they're picking up, sometimes they pick it up off of animal runoff, or sometimes they pick it up off of plants. And so they could get resistance elements or things like that because they could be bringing in bacteria that have had exposure to antibiotics too. Yes, there's all sorts of stuff coming in the hive.
Well, Megan, it's been a true pleasure having you back on the show. We've enjoyed having you on and would like to have you back and not wait 3 years for the next time. So we'll definitely be back in touch with you.
I'm thinking maybe next week, but probably that's too soon.
We need time to work out all the answers first.
Or at least some of them.
No, it's been great. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Megan.
Thanks, Megan.
Becky, I don't know if I'm really excited by what we learned or if I'm really depressed by what we learned. There's a lot of good information there. I've not really paid attention much to European Foulbrood, and now I'm going to look for it around every corner in the beehive.
I honestly, when I heard her talk about it the first time, I thought, you know what? I was already worried about varroa and viruses. And now I'm even more worried about what's on my hive tool, what's on my hands. I've got hand sanitizer in the bee truck so that in between yards, I'm definitely sanitizing, and I own more than one hive tool at this point. So I think beekeepers need to take it seriously. And thank you to Megan for sharing all that information. She's really doing something important for us.
I will admit that I have more than one hive tool, but it's not for sanitary reasons. It's just so that I can always find one. There's a hive tool in every room in my house, I think, just because I set it down somewhere.
Yeah. That's a whole nother topic. I'll tell you a quick hive tool story, but if you learn how to keep bees from me and you set your hive tool down, I'll take it. And then you'll really have to look hard for it. So we have the don't set your hive tool down rule in our bee yards.
No, I got one of those. Cliff Struhl will be happy I mentioned this, but I do have one of those magnetic hive tool holders.
Oh, that's good. That's good.
I think that's one of the best little pieces of gadgetry that I have that I just use every time I'm out in the bee yard, because that's prevented me from laying that hive tool on top of the hive and walking away, or laying it down on the ground while I'm bending over. It's
you do
nice.
Not want to lose that in a time of needing to pry something open. So it's an important tool, simple tool, an important tool. And I bet Better Bee is going to sell a lot more hive tools after this podcast episode.
It's always a welcome gift.
Right.
And that about wraps it up for this episode. Before we go, I want to encourage our listeners to rate us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts or wherever you download and stream the show. Even better, write a review and let other beekeepers looking for a new podcast know what you like. You can get there directly from our website by clicking on the reviews along the top of any web page. We want to thank our regular episode sponsors, Global Patties, Strong Microbials, and especially Better Bee for their longtime support of this podcast. Thanks to Northern Bee Books for their generous support. Finally, and most importantly, we want to thank you, the Beekeeping Today podcast listener, for joining us on this show. Feel free to leave us questions or comments at Leave a Comment section under each episode on the website. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks a lot, everybody.